Joining me on this episode of the Neil Wilkins podcast, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Bo Bennett. Now, Bo is a social psychologist. He's also an entrepreneur. He's an author. He's a producer. He's a programmer. He's a humorist. And he's also a humanist. And we are going to explore many of these concepts and these topics in the uncovering, I'm hoping, of the concept of social psychology and how it plays out for you, both as a business professional, but also as a human being. So welcome to the show, Bo.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I mean, there are so many facets to Bo Bennett that it's kind of almost tricky to know kind of where to start. What kind of brought you to the whole concept of psychology?
I've always been interested in psychology since I could remember. But if I had to point to a certain time, it was probably around age 10 when I was working for my dad in our basement. He had a machine shop down there, and I just ran some machines and pushed out some plastic parts. It was incredibly monotonous. So I listened to my sister and my mother's tapes at the time. This is back in the days when they had the cassette tapes. You know, they used to put the pencil in to wind up if they started pulling a little bit. There were cassette tapes that they used to help motivate themselves for sales because they were both into sales. So they were the classics like Zig Ziglar, Anthony Robbins, Dennis Waitley, talking about motivation and sort of, I wouldn't call it psychology, but let's call it pseudopsychology. But it was fascinating. I absolutely loved it. And I was really motivated by it. And it kind of brought me in that direction to want to know more, but not necessarily about psychology. Not right then. I was more interested in making money. I think that's kind of where I was led. I think part genetically in a way, and our family history we're all entrepreneurs. So we're all about like doing something, starting a business, making money. So I think I was on that track already, but this kind of led me to the psychological aspect of it. But I knew I wanted to make money first. So I went to school, I went to college for marketing. And then it wasn't until about 15, 20 years later, after I graduated with my undergraduate in bachelor's in marketing, that I went back to school for psychology. And then I got my degree in general psychology and then ultimately a PhD in social psychology. So I was always interested in it, but it took a long time for me to pursue it academically.
It's hard not to be successful, active and proactive in business without being interested in psychology. I think a lot of people almost get a little bit misguided that it's about your products and your services. It's about, you know, your financial business case. It's about raising money. Well, it is some of those things, but it's actually so much more fundamentally about the human relationships that you have to enable the business, to work within your business, to work around your stakeholders. It's always been a real fascination for me. I mean, like you, I did an undergraduate program in psychology. So that was, again, one of my starting sort of points here, but I haven't taken it to the level and the depth that you have sort of since then. And so I'm kind of fascinated to know what were the kind of the core kind of elements in psychology that drew you towards the more kind of social psychology side of things, because psychology as a general term is really all encompassing, isn't it? What was it that kind of took you towards the social side?
I could probably pinpoint a time back when I was in school, college, undergrad, in the marketing. We took a class on consumer behavior. And that really piqued my interest. Consumer behavior, like getting in the minds of the people that you're actually marketing to. Like what are they thinking? How can you better target your advertising and your marketing in order to meet their needs, meet what they want? So that I found that like as an incredible introduction to social psychology, essentially, like how people behave and how people interact with each other and what makes people behave a certain way. So that probably set off my interest in social psychology. But once I actually started the general psychology program, the master's, I kind of had a taste of many different types of psychology. including like mental health. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not too interested in that. I mean, it's interesting, but I didn't want to pursue that. I really was kind of focusing on the business and the critical thinking. And that's when the two aspects really jumped out at me. It was the cognitive psychology and then also the social psychology. My university didn't have a program in cognitive psychology, so I went with social psychology. I would probably say that had they had something in cognitive psychology, I probably would have chosen that path, because if I could encompass like everything I'm about, it really is like in two words, critical thinking. That's where my interests are. But social psychology, there's so much involved in critical thinking and understanding human behavior. It's just as interesting, but so I pursued it, and I'm very happy that I did. And I learned so much about, again, about human behavior, how we make choices, why we make choices. And this is interesting in every aspect of critical thinking, because critical thinking is all about like making the right choices. But it's also, if you think about business and consumer behavior and why we buy things, why other people buy things, why we don't buy things, this is choice as well. And choice is behavior, and consumer behavior, critical thinking, it's all intertwined.
Let's talk a little bit more about that whole concept of critical thinking then, because I'm seeing a pattern with people I'm connected with, trying to almost become more mindful, become more present, become more in the moment, and be making kind of rational decisions based on either strategies that are supporting them, or the tactics for, creating new business or leads, if you're in a more business development type role. But they tend to be decisions, and they tend to be thinking at I find it quite a surface level. It's kind of very predictable about, the kinds of things we've always made decisions in that way, or, this is what we've always found to be, a proven process or something like that. Sure. I personally, I don't kind of define that as critical thinking, because to me, critical thinking is more about leveraging opportunity and thinking outside of the box and really considering all of the angles and all of the perspectives. I mean, how does that kind of play out for you, Bo? Because I mean, this is just my definition of it, but are there kind of more sort of nuances and more details within just this term critical thinking that most of us are aware of?
Sure. Yeah, it's a complex term. It's a complex idea. I think it could best be summed up with referencing a book by Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, Think Fast and Slow Thinking, something like that. The book basically outlines a lot of their what they call behavioral economics, which is basically cognitive science and how people behave and how people make choices and so forth. And in that book, they outline two types of thinking: System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1, they call like the fast thinking. This is what you were kind of referring to, where we really don't dig in when we make choices. It's just kind of, yeah, sure, that sounds good. Like we don't think about it too carefully. We used our System 1, the fast type of thinking. Kind of, it's reactionary. It's feeling based. Where System 2 thinking is that really slow, deliberate, cognitive type of thinking, where we kind of take a step back. And we say, okay, well, let's think about this for a moment. What does this mean exactly? And we think about our biases. We think about everything involved. And that's where critical thinking is, in that System 2 thinking. And unfortunately, very few of us actually activate that System 2 thinking enough. We're constantly using System 1 thinking because it's easy. It takes very little cognitive effort, if any. And it's automatic. So it's just kind of the lazy way of going through life and making these kind of choices and decisions and forming opinions based on how we feel, as opposed to really thinking about the facts involved and making informed choices. But I don't want to put down humanity as we're all idiots for doing this. I mean, biologically, this is how we are. I mean, if we look at our history, like evolutionary history, we need to conserve energy. We can't possibly be thinking about and using so much energy all the time with every little decision. The reason that we survive and we prosper is because we have the system one thinking, and we could quickly navigate the world with minor decisions, huge choices that we do. What kind of cereal are we going to have? I don't know. I'll take this kind. This is fine. That's all great. There's no possible way we could survive and navigate our world if we're constantly in system two thinking. Have you ever heard of the paralysis by analysis? We would just like completely fail at everything. So the key is we're doing the right things, but we need to know when to activate that system two thinking, when to use critical thinking, and when we don't need to. So I think that is one of the key aspects of critical thinking, like basically when to implement it, the things that you need to think about. And I think like if people would understand that, then you're off to a really good start.
So when somebody's kind of almost accused of overthinking, oh yeah, he or she's, they're an overthinker. Oh, they spend so much time. And I guess another term could be procrastinating, where
Sure.
you find yourself in this loop. You're going round and round and round and round, and you actually never really make a sound decision. And of course, that's not the system two thinking. That's just being at level one and actually not really seeing the wood from the trees. That's difficult, I think, if you're naturally that way inclined, or maybe you could argue, well, there is no such thing as being naturally that way. It's just being a little lost, maybe. But that's dangerous in business, isn't it? To kind of be doing those things, because, time is very, very precious. I mean, it's precious in life, but it's a really, really precious commodity in business. We need to be making as many sound decisions as possible. Is what you're saying, Bo, that the idea that almost if we can lose a lot of the system one thinking, because it's just, no, just do it, to then maybe free up more time for the system two more critical thinking, so that we can actually say, okay, I've just made some snap decisions there. I haven't even really thought about them. I've just made a call. Those are low-hanging fruits. Those are really simple things that I can just make a decision. It's A or B. It really doesn't matter that much. Now I've got some space and time. I've got a few extra moments in my day to be able to properly stop and do some deeper thinking on this item, which I know is more important. Does it work like that? Are we actually kind of almost buying time by making some real snap judgments?
Yes, I believe so. I think that's a good summary of what I've been kind of talking about here. And I would, I would add that the being able to know the difference again between the items that you can make the snap decisions versus the ones that really need your attention. That's kind of where the difficulty is for a lot of people, because a lot of people may believe that everything is of utmost importance. And that's a problem. And then there are also people on the other side that don't think anything is very important. And that's a problem. So it's a matter of finding that balance. And there's no like simple like book somebody could read, or there's no advice that one person could give, because everybody's situation is unique. Everybody knows their own business, their own circumstances, and they have to think about like, what are the important things here? What are the ramifications of making a decision? What are the choices involved? And sort of think like, are they actually overthinking things, or are they underthinking things? And which are those, and kind of go down that path.
It's a sort of challenge, isn't it, really? Because we're getting, I guess, bombarded every day with, personal communication, actual real world physical, communications one-to-one, or lots of people to one in a meeting or something like that. You look on your smartphone and you've got a whole host of social media feeds coming in. The information overload, I guess, is not serving us here, is it, at all? Because if what we're advocating here is, look, take a little bit of time with the important stuff, let the other stuff just kind of flow through, just make those decisions, but focus on the big stuff. And you need to then stop and think about which are the big things, which are the significant stuff. And yet there's this constant noise that we're trying to navigate through, and it's pretty chaotic out there, isn't it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. One of the key aspects of marketing in general is trying to get the other person's attention, right? Like everybody has only so much attention that they could give. And all of these products and services and social media platforms and individuals, influencers, everybody is competing for people's time, people's attention. So how do you get that attention? But also, as a consumer of information, how do you know where to give your attention? And I think that's an important part of critical thinking too. It's the importance of understanding who to ignore and what to ignore, and trying not to be not to be swayed by the allure of like a clickbaity headline or something that's very tantalizing, that makes your animalistic part, that system one part thinking, want you to click and want you to spend time on something. You have to have the kind of discipline to know that this is a waste of your time, and this is not the way you want to go. And again, critical thinking is involved there, being able to make the right choices with your time.
Yeah, this is interesting stuff, isn't it? Because that whole thing about filtering stuff out, I mean, it's almost in the perfect sense. And I suppose most of us, and I'm trying to self-reflect here as I'm talking, think, actually, do I do this? And the answer is probably yes, I do,
Sure.
along with everybody else. But wouldn't it be really great if we started with that clean sheet of paper and we said, okay, world in all its various facets, brands, products, people, as you say, influencers, etc. If you're going to filter yourself into the mix to get my attention as a consumer, you've got to be providing value to even get my attention. But we're starting from zero, rather than actually, I think what most of us perceive is that the world is a busy, complicated place, and actually I've got to sift through it. It's almost like I'm trying to claw my way through this jungle of undergrowth to try and sort of see, the stuff that is going to provide value. I mean, is there almost like a reframing that we could do here, both as consumers, but also as business decision makers, to almost say, right, today I'm going to start from a blank sheet of paper, and I'm just going to note down one or two things or people or brands that are going to get my attention. So actually almost like reverse engineer this perfect scenario. Would that work?
I think that would be a good start. And I think that would be a good practice, because you would kind of get rid of all the things that are wasting your time. The one caveat I'd throw into that plan is life is unpredictable, and you never know when things will not desire, but it will need your attention, and you have to give your attention. We have emergencies, we have like business emergencies, we have opportunities that present themselves all the time that, we need to act on this now if we want to take advantage of this opportunity. So a lot of that, it's basically flexibility. It's the whole idea of being flexible. I think that's extremely important as well. But what you propose is really good for saying, okay, these are generally all the things that I do on a regular basis, and half of this stuff, 80% of this stuff, let's not deal with, because I know already that this stuff is junk. So you're starting with 20%, and then you have like 80% open perhaps to all these new things that may come up. So I think that that is a good start, as long as you have that element of flexibility in there.
Yeah, I love that, because there's almost something too logical about what I've just suggested, which is like, oh my goodness, that is going to be just ones and zeros, and it's going to be almost, it takes out the human of it, doesn't it, really? It's saying, nope, I'm not going to listen to anything else, blanking everything else out, don't want to hear. And yet this opportunity comes in, and it could be a fight or flight kind of response that I need to give, but I could miss it. And if I miss it and it was a fight one or it was a flight one, then it's like, hold on a minute, and then I'm not actually acting, in my best self-interest, am I, as a consumer? So that flexibility obviously is really important. How does that play out then for somebody who is in, let's say, a marketing role, or maybe they're in a startup, so they're kind of creating this new product or service and looking to bring it to market? Because in that flexibility that we've just talked about there, it feels like there's something that, as an ultimate marketer, I'm looking to almost find that moment of not vulnerability if you're a customer, but that moment of quiet, that moment of almost lag where nobody else is talking, no other brands are presenting, but I know you could listen, so now I'm going to market to you. And I come in with a post or an email that just happens to arrive in that sweet spot in that customer's day. I mean, that to me is kind of ultimate marketing, but it's quite intrusive, isn't it? So there's almost this kind of dichotomy that's going on here. It's great to be a really effective marketer, but it's actually flying in the face of what we're talking about. How can we kind of do this but still be kind of authentic? Because it sounds a little bit manipulative if actually what we're doing is saying, yes, we're going to advocate that you have these lovely quiet moments, but actually because now we know they're quiet, we're going to market to you in those moments.
Right. Well, it's funny you use that word manipulative, because in a sense, there's always that balance within marketing, like how much is really manipulation versus persuasion? What's the difference? And I actually recently gave a lecture on not necessarily that, but that was a topic within the lecture, talking about the difference between manipulation and persuasion. And basically, in short, it's just when we're talking about manipulating people, we're getting them to do something that we want against their best interest, against their well-being. So when you're into marketing, I think like marketing 101, they tell you like the best thing you could do is find like a win-win situation. You know, you want to sell your product, and if it's a good product and you really believe that they will be helped by your product, there you go. You got your win-win situation. So I think that's kind of what we're dealing with here. We want to persuade people. We want to persuade people to do the right thing in marketing. We want them to be better off. And in the process, we're better off because we sell another widget or whatever. So I think going into it with that mindset, you're not thinking about taking advantage of them. You're thinking, okay, I want, let's say, get products out of this for a moment, and let's just talk about like say I want my son to exercise more, right? Instead of like being in front of the computer. Like that is good for him. I know that, and that's something that let's say I would want him to do. So I'm not persuading him, but I know, I mean, I'm not manipulating him, but I know at the right time, like when to bring this up, like when he's most receptive to it. And by doing that, if he's more likely to start doing that, then it's a win-win situation. So did I manipulate him? I don't think so. Did I persuade him effectively? Yes. So I think, again, this is where a lot of psychology comes in, a lot of consumer behavior, like knowing these things about human behavior and how to most effectively get another person to do what you want them to do. Now, again, that may sound like manipulative, but it's not if it's for their best interest. And then there's a whole philosophical argument to this, isn't it? Like, well, how do you know what's in their best interest? Like you may think this is in their best interest. And that's an excellent question, because think about like virtually every religion. And here in the US, we have like the Mormons knocking on our door, and they think that they're saving our souls and we're all doomed to hell, burn in hell forever unless they're, so I mean, to them, it's the most important thing in the world. And that's just one example. And then you've got like hundreds of other religions who all think they're the most important. And then it's the same thing with products and services. Like everybody thinks that their product and service is the most important and is going to be great. So it really is, it gets a little iffy when we're talking about doing something for the person, for their best interest. And we could easily talk ourselves into this idea that we're saving the world and we're doing something great for people, when in fact it's probably just a way to help ourselves feel better about what we're doing, and talk ourselves out of the idea that, yeah, maybe we actually are manipulating them in a way. So it gets really tricky. And again, as you can imagine, you have to take everything on a case-by-case example and talk about, well, what kind of persuasion techniques are you using? How vulnerable is this population? And there are so many factors involved. And then it's your ethics, everybody's personal ethics. Like, okay, am I comfortable with this? Can I sleep at night? Can I, if this were on the front page, you know, the front page test, the front page of a newspaper, my behaviors, would I be proud of it, or would I be embarrassed? So those are all things that you kind of have to go through as a marketer.
Yeah, that's a real litmus test, isn't it? That whole front page of the newspaper thing, because there is no hiding, is there? It's kind of, this is either going to make me feel good, or this is going to be, you know, a business wrecker if ever I've seen one. So it's, yeah, it's real sensitivity there. I mean, from a social psychology perspective, is it just a case of listening? Is that the true answer? Because to take somebody else's perspective, you know, and make all those judgments, we do have to take judgments, because as marketers, business owners, business developers, salespeople, we're often, you know, in that situation where we have to step into their shoes or view it through their lenses, and we do our very, very best. But is it simply just a case of listening, or are there more sort of, you know, sophisticated methods we can use?
Yeah, no, it's definitely not simply just listening. I think, in fact, active listening is overrated, because people don't usually know what they want. And that's very important. By active listening, or not you personally, but one's assuming that the person who's expressing their feelings, A, knows how to properly express what they want, and then B, knows what they want. The fact is, a lot of us are very confused, and we don't. And that's where, like, a good salesperson comes in. They're able to see the person's situation. And yes, there's definitely listening in there. Like, you listen to maybe what they want. Like, oh yeah, I want more time. I want this to be easier, or whatever. Kind of listening, and then seeing how their product or service or whatever can help that person. So listening is involved there. But I think another really important element, and one that is more maybe genetic at the base, is empathy. Empathy is extremely important. Being able to, like, empathize with another person, and that's kind of like put yourself in their shoes and understand, like, what they're feeling and what they want. Some people are really good at that. And these are the people that make excellent marketers, or salespeople too, especially on an individual one-on-one basis. But other people are not very good at that. They don't have a high level of what's called emotional intelligence. They're not able to read people effectively. And essentially what they're doing is they're kind of limited to what a person is saying, like the verbal cues, and not the physical cues and the emotional and everything else that goes with it. So, and all of that, there's definitely an aspect of that can be learned. You can learn some emotional intelligence. You can learn reading body cues, but a lot of that is also sort of ingrained. It's part of our personality, part of who we are. We're all at, like, a certain level. So again, some people are just really good at this, and some people are really bad at it. We could all go a little bit up or down on that schedule, but unfortunately, there's a pretty good fixed point at that. And I think that's what really matters when it comes to identifying with another person in terms of whatever relationships, or if we're talking about, like, marketing or business or selling.
Yeah, I think that there's a lovely message there from you, Bo, that there's hope, because, you know, if we can learn this stuff, or if we can, you know, go on a development journey of just being consciously aware that this stuff is going on, whether we decide to try and work with it or not, it's happening. It is just that mindfulness moment where we think, okay, I've got a choice here. I can start paying attention. I can start trying to develop these skills. It may not be completely natural to me. It may be something that, you know, Bo describes that is like, oh yeah, well, I've got a friend who's like that, or there's a colleague over there who behaves like that, always seems to just be able to nail it. And that's great. I'd love to be able to do it. So at least there's hope for all of us that, you know, it can be trained and can be developed. But I'm interested in your take on bias, kind of more generally, just bias and all the various biases that we have within this sort of social psychology sort of position that we're talking about. Because No, nothing is completely without judgment, is it? Nothing is completely without, I mean, let's call it the baggage that comes from our past. And it could be negative, could be positive, could be neutral. But it has shaped and informed us to this point in time. And yet there's a negative association with this whole thing about bias. Is bias a positive thing? Can we actually make it something that we can work with? Or is it always going to be something we should fear?
No, it's not something we should always fear. And it's not, it's neutral. Yeah, it's sort of like a knife. A knife can be used for surgery to heal people, or it could be used to kill people. Biases are sort of the same. And again, biases are something that we have due to our evolutionary history. If they weren't useful, we most likely wouldn't have them. So they are useful. The problem is they're not that useful in our current environment. And I think a good example of this, one that many of your listeners have probably heard before, is the fact that, and this isn't really a bias, but this is something that is from our evolutionary past that was extremely useful. That's not now. And that's our desire to like consume as much as possible, as many calories as possible, because our ancestors in their environment, food was scarce. So those who just like ate everything and then just had like a whole bunch of fat on them, they would be the ones that survived. But now with calories are extremely abundant, we're eating everything, we're getting fat and huge, and then those people are dying. They're dying of obesity-related diseases. So it's completely going against our current environment, but yet in our evolutionary past, it was extremely helpful. Likewise, with biases, we have things like, when you hear, if we hear something in the woods, we make this snap decision like it's trying to kill us. That's essentially a bias, right? But and in our evolutionary past, our ancestors, that was extremely important, because those who just ignored the sound would get killed by a lion or something. And those of us who pay attention to it would run, and then we would survive, and we would be able to procreate and give offspring, and our offspring would have those inherited biases. So we have a lot of those going on that don't quite match with our current environment. And what's most important about these is the vast majority of biases that we talk about on a regular basis, and certainly the ones that I study, they have to do with decision-making biases and critical thinking. And the problem with this is that critical thinking is really something of our current environment, and it didn't matter as much in our old environment, in our ancestral environment. So a lot of the biases that we talk about, they are more, they put us more at a disadvantage than an advantage. So we need to be aware of the biases. We need to understand what they are. We need to understand when we're actually displaying a bias. And then we have to take that bias into consideration into our decision-making process. And with that information, we can make a better decision. So I think it's extremely important. It's so important, in fact, that I wrote a really thick book called The Bias Brain that has listed like hundreds of different biases with examples that goes through them all. And that is the first step. It's like just understanding, get a good understanding of the kind of biases that we face. And then when you're put in a situation where you're making a decision, you start to recognize your own biases. And then when you do, again, you could take that information and make better decisions.
So I'm guessing what you're advocating there then, Bo, is the fact that they're neither good nor bad, they are neutral, but it's kind of how you use that awareness that's important. So if you're aware of a particular bias that you have, and it will come naturally because you've been exposed to it, or it's kind of grown with you, it's developed into a habit. But as long as you're identifying it, as long as it kind of you deal with it and use it maybe in an authentic way, it's kind of okay. And I think a lot of people are kind of almost fearful that, I've got this bias, therefore I mustn't say anything, or I mustn't, if I'm a marketer, I mustn't publish on that particular topic because we're going to be biased in it, so I won't do anything. It feels as though if you're doing it in an honest way, it's still okay, because it's a very human thing to do.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the key aspects of science, the scientific method. One of the key things that you do at the beginning of any paper basically is you identify any biases that you have going into the research, going into the study. And it doesn't mean you can't do it, because we all, like you mentioned, we all have our biases, and we all have opinions, we all have ideas, we all have preconceived notions, what we think going into something, things we're looking for. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as we identify it, as long as we're aware of it, as long as we make other people aware of it. I think like a lot of the times when people are arguing or trying to make a point, they may say, look, like clear, like let's just go to something we're talking about, like marketing or sales. Like when a salesperson would say, like, clearly, I would love for you to buy this car, because when you buy this car, I make money. So that is great. But I'm not selling you that because for that reason. I'm selling you this car because this is exactly what you were telling me that you want. And out of all the cars out there, my knowledge in the market, this is the car for you. So I think that's really good to identify your biases, make your biases aware in discussion. And then, because that's what the other person is thinking, right? The other person is thinking, well, you just want to sell me a product. You're biased in that sense. So kind of face it head on. It's a sort of like some of the things they do in political debates and political discussions. You go after the negatives up front. You say, okay, like for example, our President Joe Biden may say, yeah, okay, I get it. I'm old, right? I'm 82 years old. I'm not running any marathons. So like, face it head on. People have this negative thought. People are all thinking this. So you go ahead and you say it, you face it, and then you address it. And now the other person doesn't have that ammunition to bring that up. So it's the same thing with biases. If people think that you're biased in a certain way, and you are biased in a certain way, go ahead and address that up front. But you got to be honest with yourself, and you got to tell them why this bias isn't a problem. If the bias is a problem to you, then maybe you got to step back and you got to rethink, and you got to, because then you're not being honest with yourself, or you're not being honest in that transaction.
This is so useful, and it's just so great to kind of hear it from you, Bo, because I think a lot of us would hope that would be the case, but to almost be given permission to kind of own it and take accountability for that. And it's okay to do it because it's a scientific method. It's just in itself as a scientific method is just, it's so embracing, so comforting, I think, for a lot of us. I'm interested in your take then on kind of maybe extending that a little, because one of the things that, I've always advocated is the art of segmentation in marketing. So not saying, hey, my product or service is applicable to everybody, but really identifying a profile of a target individual and going really deep into their preferences, where they live, their behaviors, their beliefs, their everything. And often, as I talk to non-marketers about that, they say, well, you can't do that. That's stereotyping. And I'm saying, yes, it's stereotyping. I'm a marketer. It's okay. And they say, but stereotyping is wrong because of all those things, of all the biases and everything that we've said. Sure. And I always say, yes, but stereotyping for personalization is very different to stereotyping for generalization. So I'm going to be using that stereotype to then add more value, rather than use that stereotype to, kind of let my biases run riot. So from a social psychology perspective, that feels authentic to me. How does that feel to Bo?
Yeah, I agree with you 100% in terms of the importance of what we may call stereotyping or profiling. Either way, when you hear those words in the public discourse, like, oh, they're profiling at an airport, that's horrible. But let's face it, you're not going to have a 5-year-old little girl holding a doll. She's not going to be a terrorist, right? Like, the chances of that happening are like crazy next to nothing, versus somebody who's like more like a middle-aged adult or something, like a man. Yeah, because men are, like, I don't know how many more times likely, but that's profiling. You're gender profiling. You're saying men are more violent, and that's the way it is. You know, statistically, it's important, though, in social psychology and psychology in life in general, to understand when you're talking about something statistically, that's all it means. It doesn't mean that you are more dangerous. Like, this person isn't a terrorist. This person is more likely to be a terrorist based on their generic profile. Um, and I'm just saying terrorist just because that was the first example that came to mind. But what you're talking about again is the marketing. I feel like it's the same thing with Google profiling, you know, or Facebook, understanding like who you are and tracking your activities. And people are terrified of that. People hate that. People don't like to be profiled. And but if you look at it from a marketing perspective, it shows us products we're most likely to be interested in. And that's a good thing. I mean, I don't want to see feminine products on my Facebook feed. I don't need those, you know? And it's a waste. I am interested in seeing things that I'm more interested in. So I don't mind that. And I think that anybody should, or I think like most people shouldn't have a problem with that if they're participating in social media. And I understand that a lot of people are so private, they don't want people to know anything about them, and that's fine. But you got to realize that you cannot participate in the modern world with that attitude. And by the modern world, I'm more talking about the modern digital world. And I think the same thing goes for just regular commerce as well. You have to expect that people will do some kind of stereotyping, will do some kind of profiling, that know who you are, get some information on you. And I mean, that's what it is involved in being part of our society. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you're using the information for those purposes. And again, you're not judging people. And I think that's a main difference when we talk about the negative effects of stereotyping and profiling and biases. A lot of times we're talking about judging other people, making a decision about like you, just based on people like you. That is very problematic versus, you know, just showing you an ad that you might like. I mean, it's innocuous. So, but again, like you point out, people are associating the stereotyping and bias and profiling in a marketing sense with doing that in a judgmental sense, in a personal sense. And that's where they're kind of getting angry and they don't feel right about it.
Yeah, and I think this is going to lead us into the two letters that we knew we were going to discuss at some point, A and I, because I mean, if we're talking here about profiling, AI, obviously, hugely powerful to be able to do that, and as a tool, and with the emergence of obviously of AI within marketing, social psychology, and all of this kind of profiling, it just has inherent bias built into it. It must have, because of the nature of the data and the way that we've actually collected data to reach those statistical conclusions. So how, from a social psychology perspective, is kind of AI playing at the moment? And I'd also be interested in your take on where you think this is going to go, because, you know, there is a short-term future here, which is going to have big impacts on everybody, not just marketers, but everybody. So kind of where are we right now then, as far as you're concerned with AI?
Well, artificial intelligence reflects the biases of society in general, the data that it used to create the large language model. All the data that it went out to capture is basically our data, you know, information from humans, from people, and that contains like our biases. So it's inherently biased in relative to the information that it's pulling in. So I think that's kind of like a convoluted way of saying that, it has biases like we have biases. However, there's been a change in more recent history, our recent academic history, where we may, let's say, go against reality or what's true in order to tamper what may be perceived as biases. So I think a good way to put this, like with an example, is if you remember this happened a while ago, like I don't know, like maybe a few months ago. Google updated its AI model to be less biased or more inclusive or something. So when you say like, please create an image of me of a Nazi, it'll create like this like a black guy, right? Or an Asian guy, or like an Asian woman. It's like, wait, what? You know, this is like historically, this is not correct, because what it tried to do is it tried to be more inclusive. It tried to overcome our biases of saying, when we think of like, okay, create a Nazi, oh, we're all thinking of white males. Well, yeah, because statistically, like, I mean, that's what the Nazis were. They were the white males. They were the ones in the uniforms. They were the guards and whatever. So we know that. And it is sort of like a stereotype. Were there other Nazis? I don't know history well enough, but maybe. Or like when you talk about like colonial Americans, you know, they had all the different genders. Well, of course, they're different genders, but different races of colonial Americans, which wasn't necessarily true. So AI has been like artificially adjusted to try to be more inclusive. That is a complete departure from history or reality. So but I think that Google made that huge mistake, and now the AI is correcting. They're like, okay, well, that has gone way too far. So maybe now when people just say, create me an image of a family, we're not just going to create a white family. We'll create like, sometimes we'll do a white family, sometimes we'll do a African-American family, Asian family, mixed, whatever. That's where artificial intelligence needs to go. That's where it should be headed, as opposed to the two extremes. Like if somebody says, create me an image of a family, and it'll be like a father and a mother with two kids and they're all white, you know, that's too far one direction. Whereas the other one is do an image of a Nazi for me, and they do like a black woman. Like that's too far in the other direction as well. So, but I think that it's AI again is a reflection of us, and kind of what we tell it, what the programmers tell it, what the creators of the large language model tell the machine to do. So I think we're headed in the right direction. And I think it will, like if we, again, identifying bias is extremely important. And I think that the people who are actually creating this understand this, and they know the biases, and they could work that into the learning. And I think like the AI itself could identify biases and could work around that. So I do believe, and I'm very like pro AI and bullish on AI. So when I say this, I mean it. I do think that AI will be far less biased than virtually any one of us, like any human. I think it'll have a better, more accurate, and less biased, and it won't perspective on things, and it won't have that need to be socially or politically correct, if we want to call it that, where it will be more accurate in its data, even though it may offend some people, because AI shouldn't care about that, and it won't care about that. Unless there are like artificial filters like Google put on there, like, and to tell it to care about that. But again, I think they learned their lesson.
It's going to be so interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, this topic is really fascinating, and it will, certainly inspire a lot of conversations and probably a lot of reactions actually to people really going deep into this and thinking, is it, I mean, just looking for a common thread between everything that we've covered here, but in this conversation, it feels like constant correction is the name of the game here. So either we've got to be personally just being aware that we're going to need to adjust the rudder at every point, and not necessarily pivot everything we're doing, but just being aware that we need to fine tune stuff. With the AI stuff, it is in a state of constant correction as these things get adjusted. Is this really what we're talking about here? Is just this recognition that, you know, there is nothing that is, let's call it normal, and that what we're actually doing as human beings, you know, in this most exciting time in our history, arguably, with all of the emerging technologies, all the opportunities that we have, but also all the challenges of sustainability and the planet and everything else, climate change. Now, we are at this cusp of humanity needing to get it right. So this is a hugely exciting, hugely challenging time. The concept of constant correction, which I hadn't even heard myself say those two words together before, but it feels like that's the theme here. How does that sound to you?
It sounds accurate, like what we will be experiencing. But I think, like with society, the way that we issue or implement the constant correction, there are always cycles of overcorrection. It's something's like really wrong, and then we overcorrect, we overcompensate, and then we have to go back. We kind of got to go back to the normal. It's like the big wave. It's like, whoops, we went too much, and okay, then eventually we get to where we need to be. I mean, that's constant in pretty much everything we do. So I think like that's the way humans in society work. But I think with AI, it'll be different. I think that that correction and overcorrection will be a much smaller and faster wave. So when things need to be corrected, it will be corrected, and it will pretty much be right where it needs to be, if not instantly, in a very short period of time, whereas societal changes could be forever. A good example of that, like a societal change, is the whole defund the police idea here in the United States. I don't know how much of that you guys got over there, but you know, a few years ago, like everybody was screaming because of like a couple of instances, they wanted just to like defund the cops, right? Like get rid of all their money. And I mean, it was complete and total overcorrection. And people pretty quickly realized this. People aren't singing that same song anymore. It's more of like, okay, maybe we shouldn't defund the police, but maybe we should get some more social programs in place. So it like over time, I don't know, maybe it took like a couple of years, but over time, there was a much more realistic solution in place for the problem that we were having. So, but it took like those extreme elements of making these what may be crazy suggestions and implementing these crazy ideas in order to get to the more realistic and rational solutions to the problem. So that was maybe like a 2-year cycle. And I think like with the Google example that I gave, like almost instantly when Google implemented that, it was corrected within like days or maybe weeks. I don't remember exactly how long it took, but the cycle was a lot quicker to get back to where it should be.
And so we're going to watch this continuing story, this continuing debate, with interest and with earnest, I think, aren't we? But I want to connect people with you. I mean, you have books, you have courses, you have a whole range of different kind of things going on here. How do people get in contact with you?
I have 2 different websites. One is archieboy.com, ARCHIEBOY.com. That's my business website. You can go there and you can see all the different businesses that I have and link to it. The other one is my personal website, and that's where I have all of my books, or most of my books, that you could see and you could buy and get in touch with me. And that's BoBennett.com, BoBennett.com.
Wonderful. And people, you need to go and check out Bo's work, because there is so much thought, there's so much depth, there's so much challenging material there to get you really, really thinking. So I will certainly strongly advocate that you get across there and check Bo out. Bo, I could carry on talking to you for hours. I mean, seriously, you've got so much great stuff to share, but I know you're a very busy guy, so I need to let you free from this this podcast. But thank you so much for all your wisdom, ideas, and anecdotes today. Really, really appreciated that.
Thank you. It's been great, Neil. Thank you.